What does it take to get the nickname demon duck? Just how ugly were real-life unicorns? And which ancient animal was named after a Star Wars princess? Watch to find out. Picture a gorilla. Now imagine a horse. Now imagine them crossed with each other in some kind of horrific affront against God. Congratulations, Dr. Frankenstein, you've just invented the Chalicotheres.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The Chalicotheres were the ancient ancestors of horses. They had distinctly horse-like necks, but also short hind legs and long front legs that gave them a stance similar to that of today's gorillas. That weirdness doesn't end there either. Some of the species within the Chalicotheres family had massive, sharp claws. Wear patterns of their claws, coupled with the shape of their teeth, seem to confirm that they were vegetarian grazers just like horses. But some species appear to have walked like gorillas, balanced on the knuckles of their hands. Scientists also believe that they tended to sit down as they ate, just like pandas. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Chalicotheres remains kept the scientific community confused for a very long time, and it wasn't until they started playing mix and match with modern animals that anything about them started to make sense. When you really think about it, even normal kangaroos are pretty strange creatures, but the short-faced kangaroos, which inhabited Australia about the time of the last ice age, really take the biscuit. These creatures were around 6 feet tall, weighed about 400 pounds, and had faces that looked alarmingly human. No, really. The members of the subfamily Xenokeryx had heads with flat-fronted skulls, a distinct chin, wide foreheads, and eyes set in the front of the skull rather than on the side. They had well-defined cheekbones, which had some researchers wondering, well, why? D. Rex Mitchell of the University of Arkansas did some impressive work into trying to figure this one out. Mitchell selected one version of the Xenokeryx family tree, the Xenokeryx occidentalis. He found that the skull of the occidentalis allowed it to not only bite down with incredible force, but with enough force that it could easily chew entire tree branches. That in turn opened them up to a food source that other creatures wouldn't have been able to eat. Getting those muscles working regularly enough and voila, got yourself a kangaroo supermodel. In 2010, researchers made a shocking oceanic discovery in, of all places, the Peruvian desert. These scientists found the fossilized remains of a creature they estimated to have been about 60 feet long, with some of its teeth extending to a staggering 14 inches. The verdict? A huge whale worthy of a name of biblical proportions. The creature was named Livyatan melvillei. Livyatan from the Bible creature better known as Leviathan, and melvillei from Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick. While most of today's large whales are suction feeders, these bad boys weren't content just to drift around and catch what came to them. They were hunters that preyed on other massive whales, and they had the power to do it too. It's thought that they weighed somewhere around 50 tons, and while it's likely they preferred to eat prehistoric dolphins, it's also probable that they tangled with another ancient monster, the megalodon. You wouldn't want to be out sailing when those two were going at it. If there's anything that can be said about Charles Darwin, it's that he was very talented at categorization. But there's always going to be one thing that doesn't fit into any category, and for Darwin, that was the Macrauchenia patagonica. This creature was one of a number of hoofed animals that once roamed South America, having disappeared only about 10,000 years ago. Darwin discovered its fossils in Argentina when he was on his world tour, and he had no idea what to make of them. The animal had been about the size of a rhino, but it had the teeth of a rodent, a massive head, short legs, a long neck, and a nose that grew from right between the eyes. At first, researchers decided that it must have been some sort of giant llama, but no one was really convinced about this theory. Fortunately, modern science has come to the rescue. In 2017, DNA from remains discovered in a Chilean cave were analyzed by the American Museum of Natural History and Germany's University of Potsdam. Surprisingly, they found that the creature is a distant relation of literally none of the animals you'd expect. As it turns out, if you go back about 66 million years, you'll find that Darwin's mystery creature sits at a branch of the early ancestors of the horse. Apparently, a few fair paleontologists are Star Wars fans, because when it came time for them to name a newly discovered long-extinct giraffe and deer-like mammal, they called it the Xenokeryx amidalae. And they did this for one very good reason, because it had some seriously goofy headgear. Howard! This creature thrived around 16 million years ago in an area we now know as Spain, and went the way of the dodo about 4.9 million years ago. It's thought to have looked something like a saber-toothed giraffe with furry horns sticking out from over the eyes. It also sported another T-shaped horn straight up from the back of the skull. Think of it kind of like a reverse unicorn. Funnily enough, this prehistoric giraffe is just one of an entire family of creatures recognizable by their equally weird cranial decorations. The Naboo would be proud. The best way to describe the Siberian unicorn would be by way of comparison. Take a woolly mammoth, which you likely know is the hairier version of the elephant. Now give it the horn of a rhino protruding from the center of the skull, and just for fun, make it bigger, up to a weight of around 7,700 pounds. Hey, presto, the Siberian unicorn. For a long time, it was believed that this massive beast went extinct 100,000 years ago, but more recent radiocarbon dating testing seems to suggest that they were still around just 39,000 years ago, and potentially as recently as 29,000 years ago. And that means it's entirely possible our own ancestors existed at the same time as these ancient rhinos. Sadly, the Siberian unicorns didn't have a pleasant end. About 40,000 years ago, a mass extinction event killed some of the Earth's other megafauna. It's now believed that the Siberian unicorn died in the same event, which is today known as the Quaternary extinction event. It's generally thought that this occurred as the result of both climate change and the rapid spread of humanity. Over time, both of these factors contributed to the disappearance of many animals' food sources, leading to the extinction of countless ancient megafauna. It's easy to imagine the age of dinosaurs as a genuinely terrifying time in which you'd inevitably run into some massive creature with deadly claws and bone-crushing jaws. But here's some good news. This was also the age of the Neurologus rex, which was basically a prehistoric rabbit, and it wasn't terrifying in the slightest. This critter was officially named in 2011, although its fossils had been found much earlier. It lived on the island of Menorca, near Spain, around 4 million years ago, and is estimated to have weighed about 26 pounds. It's classified as a rabbit because it shares a skull and teeth with modern-day rabbits, but that doesn't mean you'd necessarily recognize it as such. Brian Kratz of the Western University of Health Sciences explains it like this. This is a rather typical rabbit head stuck on an atypical rabbit body. Meaning? Well, for one thing, the creature's inflexible spine means it wouldn't be able to hop. Examination of their skulls also suggests they had tiny eyes and short ears, which is the opposite of what you might expect from a modern rabbit. Best of all, however, these rabbits have been described as roly-poly, a physique they developed in part because of a lack of predators and an abundance of food. Basically, they lived a good life. The Entelodonts basically look like a giant angry pig with a head that seems way too big for its matching body. Suitably, these creatures are widely known as hell pigs, even though they weren't actually pigs, being more closely related to modern hippos. If there's any prehistoric creature that looks like it might have come straight up from hell itself, it's this one. These giant heads could reach sizes of up to 3 feet long, and they accounted for as much as 45% of the creature's entire body. Those skulls were definitely powerful enough to crush bone, but thankfully they had the teeth of animals that ate mostly plants and only occasionally meat. Fossilized remains of the Entelodonts suggest that a good portion of the bones that were crushed in a hell pig's mouth would be the skulls of other hell pigs. This, as well as the scars that are frequently found in Entelodont bones, suggests that fights among the hell pigs were commonplace. And maybe it's for the best that they disappeared around 19 million years ago, since they could reach up to 2,000 pounds, which for reference is about the same size as a Clydesdale horse. Here's a shocker for you. The creatures known as demon ducks lived in Australia. The Dromornis plani belongs to an extinct family of birds that, despite being flightless, have a lot in common with modern-day ducks. They lived to terrorize Australia for a very long time indeed, first showing up in the fossil record around 55 million years ago, and only disappearing around 50,000 years ago. A ton of their fossils have since been discovered, but there's still not a lot that's known about what they were, including whether or not they had wings. The demon duck weighed an average of about 600 pounds and stood somewhere around 8 feet tall. Based on what fossils have been found, they seem to have gravitated towards water supplies such as rivers and floodplains. They also appear to have been one of the favorite foods of crocodiles, which, as you may know, have been around pretty much forever. There are actually a number of different species found within the group known as the Dromornithids, and even today it's still not known what ultimately led to their extinction. Considering the lives they lead, you've got to wonder how sloths have managed to survive at all. The strangest thing is that they've been around for a shocking amount of time, and there's at least one kind of sloth that was even lazier than the ones we have today. Modern sloths spend the majority of their time in the trees and only come down to the ground to see what's what on very rare occasions. But rewind to between 5 and 8 million years ago, and a number of sloth species had a different perspective on life. Researchers have confirmed that these ancient sloths were actually deep-diving swimmers. While the bones of animals that live on land are filled with cavities, these sloth bones were solid. They also sported beaver-like tails and leg bones that had adapted to swimming, making it entirely possible that they spent much of their time at the bottom of the ocean, grazing on vegetation. If that was the case, then it's likely they only returned to land only to occasionally sun themselves. Not a bad life, don't you think? Wombats stand about knee-high on a human. They weigh between 30 and 80 pounds, and they basically spend their lives toddling around Australia. But they looked pretty different 300,000 years ago. The ancient ancestor of today's wombat was called Diprotodon, and this guy couldn't fit inside a pillowcase. It was about the size of a rhino, weighing around 6,000 pounds, and was just as stocky as their modern-day counterparts. Researchers from the University of Queensland were able to take 300,000-year-old teeth and examine them for isotope signatures that might give some insight into just what these massive creatures were eating. Curiously, they found cycles. Each year, the ancient wombat would travel in a pattern that seemed to cover about 125 miles. It seems as though they were following both the rain and their food, making them the only marsupial known to migrate. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.